Northern California's forests are often described as familiar places, well-marked trails, popular parks, landscapes visited every year by millions of people. Yet, over decades, a quiet pattern has formed inside these environments. People vanish during ordinary moments, short walks, routine outings, places that feel understood. This documentary does not begin with danger. It begins with normalcy, with paths that appear controlled, weather that seems manageable, and decisions that feel reasonable at the time. Across national parks, state forests, and rural wilderness, similar details repeat: delayed alarms, calm movement, personal items found without explanation, searches that follow procedure yet end without resolution. What follows is not a single mystery, but a system, an examination of how terrain, weather, human behavior, and time interact in ways that quietly erase direction and outcome. The forests do not announce what they take. They simply remain unchanged. The forest that refuses to explain itself. Northern California holds some of the largest continuous forests in the United States. Redwoods rise in columns that block wind and sound. Pine and fir spread across interior ranges where roads thin and signals vanish. These landscapes are not empty, but they are unevenly observed. Human presence appears in fragments. Campsites, trailheads, ranger stations, and short stretches of maintained path interrupt long spans where movement leaves little trace. Disappearances linked to these forests do not form a single category. They occur across decades and involve hikers, hunters, children, experienced outdoorsmen, and casual visitors. The locations vary, but many fall within overlapping regions of the Sierra Nevada, Trinity Alps, Mendocino National Forest, and areas surrounding Yosemite and Lassen. The terrain changes quickly. Dense woodland shifts into granite slopes, river canyons, volcanic fields, and high meadows within short distances. Records from county sheriffs and park services show that many cases begin without urgency. A person fails to return from a short hike. A vehicle remains parked overnight. Camps are found intact. In several files, the initial assumption is delay rather than danger. By then, weather, animal movement, and human traffic have altered the ground. One early example frequently cited in archival reports involves a boy named Kenny Martin, who disappeared in 1969 near the Marble Mountains. Witnesses last saw him walking behind his family along a forest trail. The group stopped briefly. When they continued, the child was gone. Search dogs tracked his scent uphill rather than toward water. No physical evidence followed. The official report lists exposure as the likely cause, though no remains were recovered. Similar language appears repeatedly. Phrases such as "no sign of struggle," "terrain extremely challenging," and "limited visibility" recur across decades. In many cases, personal items are found in locations that do not align with expected movement. Shoes appear separated from bodies. Jackets lie folded or placed. Food containers remain untouched. These details are noted but not interpreted. Northern California forests contain natural features that complicate tracking. Volcanic soil in areas near Lassen disrupts scent trails. Granite slabs in the Sierra Nevada reflect heat and scatterprints. River systems cut deeply and redirect travel in ways not visible on maps. In some regions, dense undergrowth limits sightlines to a few feet. In others, open ground gives false confidence before narrowing abruptly. Weather shifts rapidly. Fog moves through valleys without warning. Snow falls early at elevation, even in late summer. Rangers have documented temperature drops of over 20 degrees within hours. Individuals dressed for mild conditions may be exposed without immediate awareness. This factor appears in many explanations, though it does not account for the absence of remains in extended searches. In 1981, Jeannie Niles, a nursing student, vanished while walking near Yosemite's Tuolumne Meadows. She was last seen by a campground host heading toward a restroom area. Her vehicle remained unlocked with personal belongings inside. Over 100 volunteers searched the surrounding terrain for weeks. Years later, her skull was discovered several miles away, in an area previously searched multiple times. The official cause of death was undetermined. This pattern appears in other cases. Remains are sometimes found in zones already covered, occasionally years later. Officials often attribute this to environmental movement or search limitations. However, internal memos from search teams note frustration with repeated failures in open areas. One ranger report from 1,994 states, "Location was not concealed. Visibility exceeded 100 yards. Another case frequently referenced involves James Tidwell, a 5-6-year-old experienced hunter who disappeared in 1998 near Mendocino Pass. He carried supplies, navigation tools, and a rifle. His camp was located undisturbed. No tracks led away from the site. A search helicopter passed over the area multiple times. No signal was detected. His body has never been found. Northern California forests are intersected by historical routes, once used for logging, mining, and fire control. Many are no longer maintained. Old cut lines vanish under regrowth. Abandoned equipment remains hidden in ravines. These remnants alter movement in subtle ways. A person stepping off a trail may follow a barely visible grade without realizing it leads away from known paths. Animal activity complicates recovery. Bears, mountain lions, and smaller scavengers move remains over time. Yet biologists note that predator involvement usually leaves signs. Torn fabric, disturbed soil, and bone scatter patterns typically appear. In several unresolved cases, these indicators are absent. This absence is recorded but left without comment. Search and rescue protocols emphasize probability zones based on last known position, terrain slope, and behavioral models. Children are expected to move downhill or toward water. Experienced hikers are expected to follow ridgelines or attempt self-rescue. However, Northern California cases often deviate from these assumptions. Some individuals move uphill against terrain logic. Others leave trails without clear cause. In 2014, a report from the California Department of Parks and Recreation acknowledged data gaps in long-term disappearance tracking. Records are held by multiple agencies with inconsistent formats, some cases close administratively without resolution. Others remain open indefinitely. There is no unified database that tracks environmental conditions, recovery timelines, and search outcomes together. Local residents occasionally report sounds, lights, or movement during searches that cannot be verified. These observations are typically excluded from formal records. When included, they are described neutrally. One sheriff's note from Humboldt County in 2007 reads, "Witness reported hearing voice, calling name, source not identified." Northern California forests are not unique in producing disappearances, but the concentration and recurrence draw attention. The land itself resists simplification. It absorbs sound, erases tracks, and reshapes movement. Time behaves differently in these environments. Hours pass without markers. Distances feel shorter or longer than they are. The forests continue to be used daily. Trails remain open. Visitors arrive without awareness of past events. Disappearances are not announced at entrances. They exist in reports, archived files, and quiet recollections held by searchers who have walked the same ground repeatedly without answers. The forest remains unchanged by explanation. It offers terrain, not meaning, familiar paths, vanishing people. Most disappearances associated with Northern California forests do not begin deep in isolated backcountry. They begin in places designed to feel managed and safe. Pullouts lined with gravel, trailheads with wooden signs, maps printed with distances and loop times. These locations communicate order. They suggest boundaries. People enter them believing the environment has already been interpreted on their behalf. Case files show that many missing individuals never intended to leave this controlled space. There was no expedition plan, no overnight gear, no expectation of difficulty. The activity was ordinary. A short walk before sunset, a brief stroll to a lookout, a moment away from a campsite. Because these actions are familiar, they are treated as low risk. That judgment shapes every decision that follows. Park staff at Yosemite National Park have acknowledged that a large share of unresolved disappearances originate close to maintained trails. Some begin within minutes of parking areas. A number start within visual range of roads. This contradicts the idea that people vanish only where access is limited. In these forests, infrastructure does not guarantee orientation. Familiar paths create confidence, but confidence does not always match the land. Trails curve to follow slope and drainage rather than cardinal direction. Switchbacks reverse movement repeatedly. Dense canopy limits reference to sun position. After several turns, the sense of direction becomes assumed rather than confirmed. A person may believe they are returning while slowly diverging from the route. In 1987, Todd Hargreaves, age 34, disappeared after leaving a picnic site near the Feather River Canyon. Witnesses recalled seeing him walk along a dirt access road commonly used by anglers. Less than a quarter mile from the parking area, the road narrowed and blended into forest growth. Tire ruts faded. Foot travel became informal. His vehicle remained where he left it. Search teams found no sign beyond the point where the road dissolved. These quiet transitions exist throughout Northern California. Trails often thin instead of ending. Maintenance stops without markers. Signs decrease gradually. In forests managed by overlapping agencies, responsibility shifts without notice. A clearly marked path in one zone may become undefined in the next. The change is subtle enough to miss until orientation is already compromised. At Mendocino National Forest, rangers have recorded incidents where individuals stepped only a few yards off trail. The reasons vary: resting in shade, photographing wildlife, adjusting equipment. When they attempted to return, the path was no longer visible. Dense chaparral restricts sideways movement. Uneven ground limits straight travel. Sound does not move reliably through vegetation. Shouting may not reach anyone nearby. Silence plays a role that is rarely discussed. Forest environments absorb noise. Wind moves above the canopy, leaving the ground still. Footsteps fade immediately. Without sound reflecting back, movement feels uncertain. People rely on auditory feedback more than they realize. When it disappears, confidence erodes quietly. Children are often mentioned in these cases, but adults vanish under the same conditions. In 1996, Elaine Park, a 41-year-old teacher, disappeared during a morning walk near Lake Almanor. She had followed the same route several times that month. Familiarity was emphasized in the report. There was no indication of deviation or distress. No physical evidence was ever recovered. Search operations depend on behavioral models. These models predict how lost individuals are likely to move. Children are expected to go downhill or toward water. Adults are expected to seek landmarks or attempt self-rescue. Stress responses, such as panic or freezing, are assumed. Familiarity changes these patterns. A person who believes they know the area may keep walking rather than stopping. Delay increases distance before error is recognized. Preparation is also affected by routine. Short walks are rarely treated as events requiring equipment. Phones are left in cars. Water bottles remain at camp. Clothing reflects comfort instead of contingency. In Northern California, this matters because elevation changes create localized weather. Shade masks, temperature drops. Conditions change without warning. Exposure develops gradually. In the Trinity Alps, a 2003 search report describes a disappearance following a planned walk of less than 40 minutes. Nightfall occurred before any concern was raised. When the search began, multiple side paths branched from the trailhead. Snow arrived overnight. Tracks visible during the initial hours were gone by morning. The individual was never found. Expectation influences witness response. When someone plans to return shortly, absence is interpreted as delay. Campmates wait. Drivers assume plans changed. Bystanders do not report a lone hiker because nothing appears unusual. By the time concern becomes action, time has already altered the environment. Sheriff logs across several counties show a pattern. Initial response times in routine cases range from 4 to 12 hours after last contact. In contrast, remote or technical trips often trigger immediate response when check-ins fail. The difference is not landscape, it is perceived risk. Visual repetition further complicates navigation. Forests produce similar scenes at regular intervals. Tree spacing repeats. Clearings resemble one another. Without distinct landmarks, progress is difficult to measure. GPS devices help, but they introduce dependence. Signal loss is common under canopy. Batteries fail. When digital reference disappears, spatial awareness collapses abruptly. In 2011, a hiker near Lassen Peak was located alive after 2 days. He was less than 2 miles from a maintained trail. In his statement, he said, "Everything looked the same after a while." Variations of this sentence appear in multiple survivor accounts. They describe confusion without panic. Orientation fades before fear emerges. Paths that feel known encourage movement without verification. Small decisions accumulate. Stepping around mud shifts direction. Choosing a shortcut introduces a new line. Each change seems minor. Together they form a departure. In these forests, correction is not obvious. The land does not guide people back. It absorbs movement without response. These disappearances persist not because of extraordinary forces, but because ordinary assumptions fail. Confidence replaces caution. Delay replaces urgency. Familiarity masks risk. The environment does the rest quietly. The route is known. The ending is not. When search patterns fail, search and rescue in Northern California operates within established frameworks. These frameworks are built on probability, terrain analysis, and behavioral expectation. They are designed to reduce uncertainty by narrowing focus. In most environments, they work well enough to justify their continued use. In Northern California forests, they often reach their limits. When a person is reported missing, responders begin with the last known point. Terrain slope, trail density, water flow, and vegetation are used to predict likely movement. Maps are overlaid with containment lines. Teams are deployed according to likelihood rather than coverage. This approach prioritizes efficiency. It also creates blind spots. Forests in this region undermine several core assumptions. Movement does not always follow terrain logic. People do not consistently head downhill. Trails do not remain distinct. Environmental noise interferes with scent, sound, and visibility. These variables weaken prediction models before the search begins. In the Sierra Nevada, granite slabs form large, uninterrupted surfaces. Tracks disappear quickly. Heat reflection distorts scent. Helicopter crews report difficulty distinguishing human shape from stone variation at altitude. Even thermal imaging produces inconsistent results due to uneven surface temperatures. These conditions are noted in after-action reports but rarely prompt model revision. Search dogs are central to many operations. Their effectiveness depends on stable scent patterns. In volcanic soil, common near Lassen and parts of the Cascades, scent disperses unpredictably. Porous ground absorbs particles rather than holding them at surface level. Handlers note false leads and abrupt trail termination. In several cases, dogs have tracked uphill or into areas considered low probability, then stopped without explanation. A 1,999 incident near the Trinity River involved multiple canine units following a scent line that ended in open ground. No water source was present. No tracks were visible. The official conclusion listed environmental interference. No secondary theory was offered. Air searches face their own limitations. Dense canopy reduces line of sight. Color variation blends clothing into background. Shadows create false depth. Fixed-wing aircraft cover large areas quickly but lack resolution. Helicopters hover closer but are restricted by terrain and weather. In narrow valleys, rotor wash disrupts ground evidence during repeated passes. Ground teams depend on systematic spacing. In thick forest, spacing tightens to maintain visual overlap. This slows progress and limits area covered per day. Fatigue sets in. Human attention narrows. Missed details become more likely as time extends. In some Northern California searches, teams have crossed the same ground multiple times without recognition. The concept of thorough search is often misunderstood. It does not mean every square foot is examined. It means high probability zones receive priority. Low probability zones may never be entered. If a missing person's behavior deviates from expectation, they may fall entirely outside the search envelope. In 2006, a search coordinator in Plumas County wrote in a debrief, "Area of recovery lay beyond modeled travel distance." The statement was factual. It also implied limitation. The model defined possibility. Reality exceeded it. Weather compresses timelines. Snowfall resets terrain. Rain erases tracks. Wind redistributes scents. In Northern California, these changes can occur within hours. A search that begins late may operate on altered ground from the start. The original environment no longer exists. Communication gaps further complicate response. Jurisdictional boundaries divide responsibility. County sheriffs, state parks, federal forest services, and volunteer teams operate under different protocols. Information transfer is imperfect. Historical case data is not always accessible. Lessons learned remain local rather than systemic. At Yosemite National Park, internal reviews have acknowledged that terrain familiarity among responders does not guarantee outcome. Rangers with decades of experience still encounter zones where orientation fails. Maps show elevation and trails, but not perception. The forest behaves differently on the ground than on paper. Technology is often presented as a solution. GPS units, satellite phones, drones, and tracking software have improved coverage. They have not eliminated uncertainty. Signal dropouts persist. Batteries fail. Data overload slows decision-making. Drones provide imagery but require interpretation. A shape on a screen does not resolve itself. In 2013, a drone survey near the Klamath Mountains identified several anomalies later dismissed as rock formations. Ground teams confirmed the assessment days later. Time had already passed. The search window narrowed further. Volunteer involvement adds both strength and complication. Large numbers increase coverage but reduce consistency. Training varies. Fatigue increases error. Coordination becomes complex. In some Northern California searches, volunteer turnout exceeded expectations but produced diminishing returns due to terrain density. Search patterns also assume survivability windows. After certain time frames, focus shifts from rescue to recovery. This shift alters resource allocation. Effort decreases, coverage narrows. In environments where individuals may survive longer due to shade, water access, or mild temperatures, this assumption may be premature. Recovered individuals sometimes contradict expectations. Survivors have been found days later in locations already searched, alive and responsive. These outcomes are treated as anomalies rather than signals of systemic failure. Models remain unchanged. Documentation reflects restraint. Official language avoids speculation. Reports state what was done, not what was uncertain. Gaps are implied but not explored. This maintains professionalism but limits adaptation. Northern California forests introduce variables that resist containment. They disrupt scent, erase tracks, and distort distance. They absorb sound and reduce visibility. They change rapidly. Search methods designed for open terrain or predictable movement struggle here. Failure in these cases is not dramatic, it is procedural. Each step follows protocol. Each decision is justified. The outcome remains unresolved. The forest does not challenge the search directly. It simply does not respond. Objects without context. In many Northern California disappearance cases, objects are recovered long before explanations are formed. These items are logged carefully. Locations are recorded. Photographs are taken. Yet the presence of belongings often adds uncertainty rather than clarity. They exist without narrative. They remain detached from sequence. Personal effects are usually expected to confirm movement. A dropped item suggests direction. Damaged equipment implies struggle. Discarded clothing indicates exposure or injury. In these forests, objects rarely behave this way. They appear intact. They are often clean. They are positioned rather than scattered. Search records from across Northern California show recurring patterns. Backpacks are found zipped. Shoes are placed side by side. Jackets are discovered draped over logs or rocks. In some cases, items appear along trails without accompanying tracks. In others, they surface far from the last known point, with no clear route connecting the locations. In 1992, during a search near the Yola Bolly Wilderness, responders located a missing hiker's backpack resting upright against a tree. The pack contained food, a map, and matches. Nothing was missing. There were no signs of animal damage. The ground around it showed no disturbance. The hiker was never found. The pack did not indicate progress or retreat. It marked presence without explanation. Objects normally provide timelines. In these cases, they interrupt them. Investigators cannot determine whether items were dropped intentionally, removed for comfort, or relocated after loss. Environmental movement is often cited, but it does not fit every scenario. Flowing water explains downstream transport, not elevated placement. Wind explains scatter, not careful arrangement. At Yosemite National Park, internal reports acknowledge that item recovery frequently fails to narrow search areas. In several cases, belongings were found outside the predicted travel radius. This forced teams to reassess probability zones after resources had already been deployed elsewhere. Clothing recovery raises additional questions. Hypothermia-related paradoxical undressing is sometimes mentioned, but it does not apply consistently. Some recovered garments show no damage. Others are layered rather than removed completely. In a 2004 case near Tuolumne Meadows, a sweater was found folded on a flat rock. No other items were nearby. The temperature that night dropped below freezing. No remains were located. Shoes are among the most frequently recovered objects. They appear separated from bodies in ways that resist interpretation. In rugged terrain, footwear is critical. Voluntary removal is unlikely unless severe discomfort or confusion is present. Yet many shoes show little wear or damage. Soles are intact. Laces are tied. Their condition does not match extended travel. One Mendocino County case file notes a single boot discovered several miles from the trailhead. The matching boot was never found. The report does not speculate. It lists coordinates and weather conditions. The absence of explanation remains unaddressed. Maps and navigation tools offer similar frustration. In some cases, maps are recovered unused. They show no markings. Compasses are found functioning. GPS devices are discovered, powered off, or drained. These items suggest preparedness, yet they do not clarify decision-making at the moment of loss. Food containers add another layer. Snacks remain unopened. Water bottles are full. This suggests the individual did not reach a point of desperation or prolonged exposure, yet disappearance still occurred. The absence of consumption contradicts survival behavior models. Objects also appear in areas that have already been searched. This creates uncertainty about timing. Did teams miss the item earlier, or did it arrive later? Environmental explanations are offered, but delayed discovery remains common even in open terrain. One ranger note from 2010 states, "Item, located in high visibility zone, previously cleared." Animals are often considered responsible for item movement. Bears and smaller scavengers can transport objects. However, wildlife interaction usually leaves marks, teeth damage, claw tears, drag patterns. In many Northern California cases, recovered items show none of these indicators. Fabric is intact, containers are sealed, waterways complicate interpretation. Rivers move objects downstream, but they also damage them. When items appear clean and undamaged, far from water sources, hydrological explanations weaken. The placement of objects sometimes suggests pause rather than flight. Items are found where someone might stop to rest. Logs, clearings, rock outcrops. These locations imply calm rather than panic. Yet calm does not align with disappearance. Investigators are trained to avoid assumption. Reports describe without interpretation. Language remains neutral. Item located. Condition noted. No further evidence observed. This restraint preserves objectivity but leaves patterns unexplored. In survivor accounts, recovered items take on retrospective meaning. Individuals found alive often recall discarding items deliberately to reduce weight or mark position. However, these decisions are usually reported consciously. They are tied to stress and problem solving. In unresolved cases, intent cannot be confirmed. The lack of damage is one of the most persistent anomalies. Forest environments are harsh. Exposure alters materials quickly. Moisture stains fabric. Insects infest organic matter. Sun fades color. Yet many recovered objects appear preserved. This suggests limited exposure time, conflicting with extended absence. In 2015, a search near the Klamath National Forest recovered a missing campus hat hanging from a low branch. It was clean. No scent trail extended beyond it. The branch showed no breakage. The placement did not suggest accidental loss. The camper was never located. Objects also fail to align with expected travel direction. Items are sometimes found uphill when models predict downhill movement. They appear beyond natural barriers without explanation. Cliffs, rivers, and dense brush lie between points without evidence of crossing. These inconsistencies strain interpretation. Objects usually anchor narratives. Here, they float. They confirm presence without clarifying action. They exist as isolated data points. Northern California forests complicate context. Dense vegetation limits line of sight. Terrain hides movement. Environmental forces erase sequence. Objects remain, but the story around them does not assemble. The accumulation of such cases creates a record filled with belongings and empty conclusions. Backpacks without owners, shoes without tracks, jackets without bodies. Each item is catalogued. Each resists explanation. The forest does not destroy these objects immediately. It holds them. It releases them without guidance. They do not speak to what happened next. They simply remain where understanding stops. Time gaps and delayed discoveries. One of the most persistent features of Northern California disappearance cases is the delay between loss and discovery. Evidence surfaces months or years after searches have ended. Remains appear where teams once walked. Objects emerge in places considered cleared. Time does not resolve these cases. It rearranges them. Search operations are built around urgency. The first 72 hours are treated as critical. Scent remains viable. Tracks persist. Survival probability is highest. Resources are concentrated early, then reduced as time passes. This structure reflects practical limits, but it also shapes outcomes. When early searches fail, later discoveries are interpreted through distance rather than sequence. In Northern California forests, time alters terrain unevenly. Seasonal cycles are sharp. Snow buries ground in winter. Melt reshapes slopes in spring. Vegetation grows rapidly in summer. Leaf fall conceals detail in autumn. Each cycle resets the surface while leaving deeper layers untouched. Evidence may be hidden, preserved, or displaced depending on timing. Delayed discoveries often occur in areas previously searched. This does not necessarily mean teams failed. It reflects how visibility changes. A body concealed by brush may be invisible in summer and exposed in winter. Snowmelt reveals objects that were buried months earlier. Flooding redistributes remains along riverbanks long after initial loss. In 2008, skeletal remains were located in the Plumas National Forest nearly 5 years after a disappearance. The site lay within a drainage searched during the initial operation. The recovery report noted that seasonal runoff had altered the channel repeatedly. The remains were found lodged against rocks downstream from the original search zone. No cause of death was determined. Time also affects perception. When remains are found long after disappearance, assumptions shift. Movement is inferred from distance alone. The sequence of events collapses into a single outcome. What happened between loss and discovery becomes unknowable, yet interpretation often fills the gap. At Yosemite National Park, several recoveries have occurred years after extensive searches. In some cases, hikers stumbled upon bones near popular routes. The locations were not hidden. The delay was attributed to environmental concealment and human oversight. Official explanations remain consistent, though each case differs. Decomposition complicates analysis. Soft tissue disappears quickly in forest conditions. Insects accelerate breakdown. Scavengers scatter remains. By the time discovery occurs, forensic indicators are limited. Trauma is difficult to assess. Cause of death is often listed as undetermined. This leaves interpretation open but unsupported. Delayed discovery also alters investigative priority. Once time has passed, cases move from active search to archival status. Personnel change, memory fades, context is lost. When new evidence appears, it is evaluated without the full immediacy of the original environment. In some Northern California cases, remains are found in close proximity to trails years later. These discoveries raise questions about visibility rather than movement. How could an area used daily yield nothing until chance intervention? Reports note vegetation growth and seasonal cover, but the pattern repeats often enough to draw attention. Objects follow similar timelines. A backpack surfaces after winter storms. A shoe is uncovered by erosion. A hat appears hanging from a branch long after search conclusion. Each item is logged as new evidence, but its arrival time disrupts reconstruction. Investigators cannot determine whether the object was always there or moved later. Search documentation acknowledges these limitations. After-action reports include phrases such as "environmental factors may have obscured evidence" and "delayed exposure likely." These statements explain possibility without confirming mechanism. Time gaps also affect public awareness. Families wait years for answers. Media attention fades. When discoveries occur, they briefly renew focus before closing again without resolution. The case remains incomplete, but altered. In 2012, remains discovered near the Klamath River were linked through dental records to a hiker missing since 2001. The site lay several miles from the last known point. The intervening years erased tracks, scent, and context. The report concluded that movement likely occurred early, but offered no explanation for direction or distance. Environmental preservation plays a role. Cold temperatures at elevation slow decomposition. Shade reduces exposure. In some cases, remains are preserved longer than expected. In others, rapid breakdown leaves little to recover. This inconsistency frustrates pattern recognition. Delayed discoveries challenge assumptions about survivability windows. Some individuals may live longer than models predict, especially in temperate climates with water access. Others may perish quickly due to injury or exposure. Without timely recovery, these distinctions blur. Time also affects search memory. Areas once considered cleared may be revisited years later with different personnel. The original coverage may not be remembered accurately. Maps change. Trails shift. What was once dense becomes open, or vice versa. Discovery then appears anomalous when it reflects environmental change. Northern California forests are not static backdrops. They are active systems. Rivers migrate, trees fall, fires reshape landscapes. Post-fire environments expose ground previously hidden. Several recoveries have occurred after wildfires removed vegetation, revealing remains long concealed. In 2018, following a controlled burn near Shasta Trinity National Forest, hikers discovered bones near a ridgeline. Records later connected them to a disappearance from the early 2000s. The area had been searched originally, but heavy brush limited visibility. Fire changed the equation. These cases demonstrate how time functions as both barrier and reveal. It removes detail while uncovering location. It erases sequence while exposing outcome. Each delayed discovery closes one question while opening several others. Official language remains careful. Reports avoid speculation. They describe conditions at discovery, not events at disappearance. This maintains accuracy, but leaves patterns unresolved. Northern California forests allow evidence to surface without explanation. They release fragments without narrative. Time does not clarify intent or action. It simply alters what can be seen. The accumulation of delayed discoveries builds a record marked by absence between moments. disappearance and recovery become separated by years of silence. What happened in between remains outside documentation. These time gaps are not anomalies. They are recurring features. They reflect how environment, procedure, and expectation intersect. The forest does not withhold evidence deliberately. It reveals it on its own schedule. Weather that erases direction. Weather in Northern California forests rarely arrives as a single, obvious event. It shifts quietly. Changes accumulate rather than announce themselves. A drop in temperature begins in shaded areas long before it is felt in open ground. Fog forms at lower elevations while higher ridges remain clear. Snow falls on peaks while valleys stay dry. These transitions matter because they interfere with orientation before danger is recognized. Many disappearance cases begin on days forecast as calm. Mornings open clear and mild. By afternoon, instability develops. Forecast regions are wide, covering hundreds of square miles. They do not reflect the behavior of narrow valleys, river corridors, or forest interiors. A person enters expecting continuity and instead encounters variation. Conditions change faster than awareness adjusts. Fog is among the most disruptive elements. In coastal ranges and inland basins, marine layers move quickly through gaps in terrain. Visibility can shrink from open distance to a few feet in minutes. Sound dulls. Direction loses clarity. Under fog, trails lose definition. Edges blend into ground cover. A person may continue walking without realizing their path is bending or drifting. Search logs repeatedly reference sudden fog. These notes do not describe storms or severe weather. They describe a loss of reference. In multiple cases, individuals were last observed under clear skies. Fog formed later. When responders arrived, the environment no longer matched witness descriptions. The forest had already changed. Temperature shifts deepen disorientation. Northern California forests experience sharp thermal contrasts. Warm daylight gives way to rapid cooling after sunset. In ravines and shaded corridors, temperatures fall earlier. Mild discomfort becomes impairment without warning. Hands lose sensitivity. Fine motor skills decline. Tasks such as adjusting straps, reading maps, or operating devices require more effort. Hypothermia often develops without drama. It begins with judgment rather than pain. Decisions slow. Problem-solving weakens. Individuals may continue moving without strategy. Survivor accounts frequently describe confusion before fear. Direction fades before panic appears. By the time danger is felt, orientation has already degraded. Snow introduces another layer of difficulty. At elevation, snowfall can occur outside winter months. Late spring and early fall storms are not uncommon. Trails disappear under accumulation. Tracks vanish within hours due to wind. Search windows compress rapidly. In several Sierra Nevada cases, snow arrived overnight following disappearance, resetting terrain before teams could act. Rain alters evidence in different ways. Light rain dampens scent trails without removing them. Heavy rain erases them entirely. Streams swell and change crossing points. Dry channels become barriers. Mud can preserve tracks briefly, then destroy them as conditions shift. Timing becomes decisive. A search delayed by even a few hours may begin on altered ground. Wind affects perception unevenly. Above the canopy, air moves freely. At ground level, it may be still. Sound behaves unpredictably. Voices echo or vanish. Direction cannot be inferred reliably. In some cases, individuals report hearing voices that seemed close but led nowhere. Sound does not travel straight in forested terrain. Weather also changes how the forest looks. Landmarks appear different under cloud cover. Color contrast fades. Depth perception flattens. Familiar shapes lose distinction. Without sun, position, orientation relies on memory. In 2002, a hiker near a Northern California ridgeline was found alive after spending a night less than a mile from a trail. He described dense fog and falling temperatures. He believed he was descending towards safety. In reality, he had moved laterally along the slope. The error was subtle. The consequence was significant. Search teams operate under the same conditions. Helicopters are grounded by low visibility. Canine units struggle when scent disperses or is masked. Ground teams slow their pace to avoid injury. Coverage decreases as urgency increases. Weather compresses effective search time without warning. Forecast interpretation introduces further complication. Public forecasts describe broad trends. Forest interiors behave differently. Valleys trap cold air. Slopes channel wind. Rivers and lakes generate localized fog. Responders may arrive expecting one set of conditions and encounter another. Adjustments take time that is not always available. Weather also influences individual decision points. Plans change mid-walk. Someone turns back too late. Another seeks shelter off trail. A third follows water unintentionally. Each choice compounds deviation. Once conditions shift, the original route loses relevance. In some cases, weather obscures remains for extended periods. Snow preserves, rain buries, vegetation grows. When conditions change, evidence appears without context. Discovery follows weather cycles rather than movement. Investigators must interpret static remains without knowing when exposure occurred. Fog appears repeatedly in delayed discoveries. Items surface after fog seasons pass. Clear conditions reveal what may have been present all along. This creates the impression of relocation when none occurred. Timing confuses sequence. Cold affects survival windows unevenly. Some individuals endure longer than expected due to shelter, clothing, or water access. Others succumb quickly due to injury or exposure. Without timely recovery, these differences disappear. Cause and timeline collapse into uncertainty. Weather also delays reporting. Sudden storms encourage waiting. Campers assume conditions cause delay. Hikers expect others to shelter in place. Absence is rationalized. Response begins later, often after the environment has shifted again. In Northern California forests, weather does not need to be extreme to be decisive. It only needs to alter reference. Direction depends on consistency. When consistency fails, movement loses meaning. A person may walk steadily while drifting without awareness. These environments rarely overwhelm immediately. They subtract gradually. Light fades, sound dulls, temperature drops, orientation erodes step by step. By the time danger is recognized, correction is difficult. Weather does not operate in isolation. It interacts with terrain, vegetation, and expectation. Familiar paths feel safe until conditions change. Preparation assumes stability. Stability is rarely present. Search documentation reflects this quietly. Weather is listed among conditions. It is rarely emphasized, yet it intersects every phase of disappearance and recovery. It shapes what can be seen, heard, and tracked. Northern California forests are shaped by weather more than by trail design. Paths exist within systems that reset daily. When weather shifts, the forest rewrites orientation rules. Disappearance does not require catastrophe. It requires loss of reference. Weather provides that quietly. It removes cues without removing comfort at first. People continue moving without guidance. Under clear skies, the forest is navigable. Under fog, rain, or cold, it becomes ambiguous. Direction becomes assumed rather than verified. Assumption replaces confirmation. Weather erases direction not through force, but through subtraction. Contrast fades. Sound diminishes. Warmth recedes. Certainty dissolves. What remains is movement without anchor, the role of terrain memory. Northern California forests do not reset when people leave them. They retain traces of movement in ways that are uneven and indirect. This quality can be described as terrain memory. It does not preserve intent or sequence. It preserves alteration, where soil compresses, where vegetation bends, where water redirects. These changes influence later movement while hiding earlier deviation. Most trails in these forests are not fixed lines. They are negotiated paths shaped by repeated use. Feet wear soil, hooves widen edges, rain deepens channels. Over time, these paths remember traffic without recording direction. They guide movement forward but do not guarantee return. Terrain memory matters because it can mislead. A shallow depression suggests a route even when it is no longer maintained. A flattened patch of grass implies passage. These cues encourage continuation. They rarely indicate where the path ends. In Northern California, abandoned logging roads are common. Many were cut decades ago and left to erode. Their grades remain subtle. Trees regrow around them. Leaf litter conceals boundaries. To an unfamiliar hiker, these roads feel intentional. They descend smoothly. They curve predictably. They lead away from known trails without obvious warning. Search reports frequently mention old roadbeds and unmapped grades. These features do not appear on modern maps. They exist physically, remembered by the land rather than documentation. People follow them, believing they remain connected. Often they do not. Terrain also remembers water. Seasonal streams carve channels that look permanent. In dry months, these channels appear safe to follow. They descend gradually. They feel logical. During wet periods, they flood or end abruptly. Individuals who follow them may reach impassable terrain without realizing it until retreat is difficult. In the Sierra Nevada foothills, granite slabs store movement differently. Repeated foot traffic polishes stone. This creates smooth surfaces that feel like natural walkways. These slabs often slope laterally rather than downhill. Following them can carry someone across ridges rather than toward valleys. The movement feels controlled. Direction changes quietly. Vegetation reinforces these cues. Plants bend toward light and open space. Gaps persist where traffic once existed. A person stepping off a trail may encounter a corridor that feels navigable. That corridor may narrow gradually, closing behind them. Return becomes harder than advance. Terrain memory also hides deviation. When ground shows signs of passage, individuals assume others have traveled there successfully. This assumption reduces caution. The land does not indicate how long ago the passage occurred or whether it led anywhere. Search teams are influenced by the same features. Ground crews follow visible routes first. Old grades draw attention. Clear corridors appear efficient. This can pull effort away from less obvious zones. Areas without terrain memory are harder to justify searching early. In 2009, a search coordinator noted that teams repeatedly followed a faint ridge path believed to be a game trail. Later analysis suggested it was an abandoned firebreak. The missing person was never found. The terrain guided searchers as much as it may have guided the individual. Terrain memory interacts with fatigue. As individuals tire, they rely more on environmental cues. Decision-making simplifies. Choices favor ease of movement. Paths that feel smooth are chosen over those that require effort. This biases movement toward remembered routes, even if they are incorrect. In Northern California forests, ease does not correlate with safety. A gentle slope may lead into a bowl with no exit. A wide corridor may narrow into dense growth. The land remembers movement but does not preserve outcomes. Time amplifies these effects. Seasonal growth alters appearance. A path clear in spring may be obscured in summer. A corridor visible in winter may vanish under foliage. Terrain memory shifts, but not evenly. Some cues persist, others disappear. This inconsistency complicates both navigation and reconstruction. Fire reshapes terrain memory dramatically. Burn scars remove vegetation and expose ground. Old routes become visible again. In several cases, remains have been discovered after fires revealed previously hidden areas. The land remembered what documentation had lost. After fires near the Trinity Alps, responders reported seeing old travel lines not visible for decades. These lines influence post-fire movement and search patterns. They also explained how individuals may have traveled beyond expected zones without detection. Terrain memory also interacts with sound. Valleys funnel noise, ridges block it. A person may hear activity and move toward it, believing proximity is decreasing. In reality, terrain redirects sound. Movement based on auditory memory can increase separation. Watercourses contribute further complexity. Riverbanks change shape with seasons. Gravel bars shift. Footprints appear and vanish. A person following a river may believe they are maintaining orientation. River bends may lead them farther from access points. Search documentation often references terrain-induced deviation. This phrase acknowledges influence without detail. It implies that land features altered movement. It does not specify how or why. Terrain memory operates without clear metrics. Maps do not capture this fully. They show elevation and contour. They do not show ease. They do not record past use. They do not reflect how ground feels underfoot. Terrain memory exists below cartography. Survivors sometimes describe following what felt like a path that later disappeared. They recall confidence that faded gradually. This matches how terrain memory operates. It offers guidance without guarantee. It withdraws clarity slowly. Northern California forests contain layers of past use, indigenous trails, mining routes, logging cuts, fire breaks, animal paths. These layers overlap. Some are visible only in certain light or season. Movement across these layers is not linear. Disappearance occurs when these remembered routes intersect with expectation. Familiarity encourages trust. Trust delays correction. The land does not correct. It continues offering cues that no longer apply. Terrain memory also affects recovery. Remains may settle in depressions created by past use. Objects lodge in channels worn by previous flow. These locations attract searchers later, but only after time or exposure reveals them. The forest does not erase movement evenly. It preserves some traces and removes others. This selective memory creates misleading narratives. Investigators reconstruct paths based on what remains, not what occurred. Northern California terrain holds history without context. It remembers pressure, not purpose. It guides movement without direction. It hides deviation behind familiarity. These landscapes are not hostile. They are indifferent. They respond to use, weather, and time. They do not distinguish between intended travel and accidental departure. When people move through these forests, they enter systems shaped by prior movement. Those systems influence choice quietly. Terrain memory does not force error. It makes error feel reasonable. Disappearance does not require sudden change. It requires gradual misalignment between expectation and ground. Terrain memory supplies the ground. Expectation supplies the rest. The forest does not forget where people have gone before. It does not remember why. Human error without panic. Many disappearance narratives rely on sudden fear, a wrong turn, a fall, a moment of alarm. In Northern California forests, records suggest a different pattern. Errors occur without urgency. Decisions are made calmly. Movement continues without stress. The absence of panic is one of the most consistent features. Case reports frequently describe individuals who were experienced, rested, and uninjured at last contact. They were not fleeing weather. They were not rushing against time. They were engaged in routine activity. Their behavior did not signal distress. This matters because it shapes how mistakes unfold. Human navigation depends heavily on confirmation. People check position by comparing expectation with environment. When these align, movement continues. When they diverge sharply, correction occurs. In forests, divergence is often subtle. Expectation degrades gradually rather than breaking. Small decisions compound quietly, choosing to continue rather than stop, assuming the trail curves ahead, believing a landmark will appear soon. Each choice feels reasonable in isolation. Together they create displacement without awareness. Search interviews with survivors support this pattern. Many report that they did not realize they were lost until hours had passed. They recall confidence early on. They recall thinking orientation would correct itself. Cognitive load plays a role. Walking occupies attention lightly. The mind shifts inward. Thoughts drift. Awareness narrows. This is not negligence. It is normal behavior during routine movement. In familiar settings, attention relaxes further. Forests amplify this effect. Visual input is repetitive. Auditory cues are limited. The brain receives little new information to trigger recalibration. Direction feels stable even when it is not. Fatigue changes decision thresholds. As energy decreases, people favor continuity over interruption. Stopping feels disruptive. Continuing feels easier. This bias favors forward movement, even when orientation is uncertain. Maps and devices do not always interrupt this process. A map requires pause and interpretation. A device requires signal and battery. If tools are inconvenient, they are deferred. Deferral becomes habit. Human beings also rely on narrative coherence. They expect paths to lead somewhere logical. They expect routes to reconnect. When the environment violates this expectation, the brain fills gaps optimistically. The assumption of continuity delays corrective action. In many Northern California cases, individuals moved laterally rather than vertically. They did not descend toward roads or water, as models predict. They followed terrain that felt manageable. This reflects preference, not panic. The absence of fear alters later interpretation. Investigators expect panic-driven behavior. When evidence does not support it, cases feel anomalous. Yet calm error produces different signatures. Objects remain intact. Clothing stays on. Movement appears deliberate. Human error without panic also affects communication. Individuals do not leave notes. They do not signal distress early. They believe resolution is imminent. By the time urgency emerges, options have narrowed. This pattern appears across age groups. Children wander without fear. Adults continue confidently. Elderly individuals follow routines. Experience does not eliminate the effect. It may increase it by reinforcing expectation. Training influences response unevenly. Outdoor experience builds skill, but it also builds confidence. Confidence reduces checking behavior. Experienced hikers may rely on intuition longer than novices. Intuition works until it does not. In search debriefs, responders note that many missing individuals likely did not recognize their situation as dangerous until late. This delays emergency behaviors such as staying put or signaling. Late recognition reduces survivability and traceability. Human perception also misjudges distance in forested terrain. Movement feels slower or faster, depending on slope and surface. People overestimate progress. They believe they have traveled farther than they have. This distorts decisions about turning back. Memory compounds the issue. People recall how a trail looked earlier and assume continuity. When reality diverges, memory fills the gap. The forest reinforces this by offering similar scenes repeatedly. Human error without panic does not produce dramatic moments. it produces silence. No cries, no sudden stops. Movement continues. This silence frustrates reconstruction because there is no clear failure point. Search timelines reflect this. Last known actions are mundane. No alarms are raised. No witnesses report distress. Absence becomes the first signal, not behavior. This also affects public interpretation. Disappearances are often framed as mysterious or extreme because ordinary explanations feel insufficient. Yet, ordinary behavior in complex environments produces outcomes that appear extraordinary only in retrospect. Human error is often described as mistake. In these cases, it is better described as drift. Drift is not chosen. It emerges from repeated reasonable decisions made without feedback. Northern California forests are particularly suited to this. They provide comfort without clarity. They allow movement without correction. They do not punish error immediately. Consequences arrive later, after distance and time have accumulated. Survivors who are found often express surprise rather than fear. They report disbelief at how far they traveled. They do not recall a moment of realization. Loss of direction feels gradual. Human error without panic leaves limited evidence. No signs of struggle, no abrupt change in behavior. This absence is often misread as absence of cause. In reality, the cause is subtle and distributed across time. Search and rescue training increasingly acknowledges this pattern. Emphasis shifts toward early intervention and education, encouraging frequent position checks, promoting stopping when uncertain. These strategies aim to interrupt drift. However, drift remains difficult to prevent. It relies on self-awareness that declines during routine activity. It exploits comfort. It operates quietly. Northern California disappearance records show that many individuals likely remained calm for much of their movement. This challenges assumptions about survival behavior. Panic is not required for fatal outcomes. Error can occur under normal mental states. The environment does not need to be hostile. It needs to be ambiguous. Human error without panic reframes these cases. It removes drama. It replaces it with accumulation. Small choices, familiar ground, quiet continuation. The forest does not provoke fear immediately. It allows confidence to persist. That persistence carries people farther than they intend. Disappearance, in this context, is not a moment, it is a process. Why experience doesn't always protect you? Experience is often treated as insulation against risk. In outdoor environments, it is assumed to reduce error, sharpen judgment, and prevent loss. Northern California disappearance records complicate this assumption. Experienced hikers, hunters, anglers, and long-time locals appear frequently in unresolved cases. Their familiarity does not prevent disappearance. In some conditions, it contributes to it. Experience changes how people interpret environments. Novices approach unfamiliar terrain cautiously. They stop often. They verify direction. They rely on explicit markers. Experienced individuals move differently. They trust internal maps. They assume continuity. They expect the land to behave as it has before. This expectation shapes decision-making. A person who has walked a forest for years does not read each junction as a choice. Many turns are made automatically. Routes are followed by feel rather than reference. When the environment changes subtly, recognition is delayed. Northern California forests are not static. Trails shift due to erosion, fire, and regrowth. Logging roads degrade. Animal paths widen. Seasonal use alters ground texture. A route remembered from previous years may no longer exist as expected. Experience fills the gap optimistically. In several Sierra Nevada cases, missing individuals were described as very familiar with the area. This phrase appears repeatedly in reports. It is often followed by surprise at the outcome. Familiarity is treated as protection, so its failure feels anomalous. Experienced outdoors people also carry different assumptions about risk. They may leave gear behind intentionally. They may travel lighter. They may forego maps or devices. These choices are not careless. They are based on prior success. However, they reduce margin for error when conditions diverge. Local knowledge is also partial. Knowing one drainage does not mean knowing all adjacent ones. Forests blur boundaries. A ridge crossed unintentionally may lead into unfamiliar terrain that resembles known ground closely enough to delay recognition. In Northern California, repeated visual patterns amplify this problem. Pine stands resemble one another. Granite features repeat. Clearings appear interchangeable. Without deliberate checking, it is easy to believe one is still within known space while slowly exiting it. Experience also affects response to uncertainty. Novices stop sooner when confused. Experienced individuals often continue, believing resolution lies ahead. This confidence delays corrective action. By the time concern arises, distance has increased. Search interviews with survivors show this pattern. Experienced hikers report thinking, "I knew where I was," long after deviation occurred. They did not feel lost. They felt temporarily off route. That distinction matters. Temporary problems invite continuation. Loss demands interruption. Experienced individuals may also resist asking for help. They assume self-correction is possible. They avoid signaling early. This reduces the chance of timely response. In disappearance cases, absence is often the first indicator of trouble. Familiarity can also narrow attention. Known environments require less conscious processing. The brain conserves effort by relying on memory. This reduces monitoring of subtle changes. In hunting cases, focus narrows further. Attention locks onto tracking, terrain sign, or game movement. Peripheral awareness decreases. Direction is maintained loosely. When pursuit ends, orientation may already be compromised. Local residents face similar issues. Daily exposure creates comfort. Short trips feel trivial. Risk is discounted. Northern California case files include locals missing after brief errands or routine walks. Their confidence delayed alarm. Search coordinators note that experienced individuals often move farther from last known points than expected. This contradicts behavioral models that assume novices travel farther. Experience enables endurance, but not necessarily accuracy. Terrain familiarity can also mislead search efforts. Teams may assume experienced individuals chose optimal routes. They may overestimate decision quality. This biases search direction and delays coverage of less intuitive areas. In 2010, a search debrief from a Northern California forest noted that the missing subject's experience influenced initial search planning. Later findings suggested movement inconsistent with those assumptions. The report did not assign fault. It acknowledged model limitation. Experience also shapes interpretation of weather. Seasoned outdoors people often tolerate marginal conditions longer. They delay shelter or retreat. This increases exposure when conditions worsen unexpectedly. Fire, scars, and regrowth add complexity. Experienced locals may rely on pre-fire mental maps. Post-fire landscapes differ. Old landmarks disappear. New openings redirect movement. Familiar routes feel wrong without clear reason. Technology does not always correct this. Experienced individuals may distrust devices, relying instead on intuition. When intuition fails, digital tools may be unavailable or unused. The role of experience in these cases is not paradoxical. It is conditional. Experience works best in stable environments. Northern California forests are variable. They change without announcement. They reward caution as much as skill. Disappearance does not imply incompetence. Many missing individuals acted reasonably based on prior knowledge. That knowledge simply did not apply fully at that moment. This reframes experience as a double-edged factor. It enables movement and endurance. It also encourages assumption. When assumption replaces verification, vulnerability increases. Search records increasingly reflect this understanding. Experience is now treated as neutral rather than protective. Models adjust travel distance expectations accordingly. Outcomes still vary. Northern California forests do not distinguish between novice and expert. They respond to movement, weather, and time. Familiarity does not alter terrain behavior. For experienced individuals, loss often occurs quietly. No moment signals failure. Confidence persists. Movement continues. Absence becomes the first sign that experience was insufficient. Experience does not guarantee safety. It changes how risk appears. Silence as a search barrier. Silence in Northern California forests is not the absence of sound. It is a condition shaped by terrain, vegetation, and distance. Noise exists, but it does not travel evenly. It bends, fades, and disappears in ways that contradict expectation. Human navigation relies on sound more than most people realize. Footsteps echo in enclosed spaces. Voices confirm proximity. Distant noise offers orientation. In forests, these cues weaken. Trees absorb vibration. Uneven ground disrupts reflection. What remains is directional uncertainty. Many missing individuals report later that they attempted to call out. They assumed voices would carry. In open terrain, this assumption holds. In dense forest, it fails. Sound dissipates quickly. Calls travel upward or sideways rather than forward. A person may shout repeatedly without being heard a short distance away. Search teams encounter the same limitation. Ground crews spread out and call names. Whistles are used. Air horns sound briefly. In Northern California forests, these methods lose effectiveness within seconds. Vegetation breaks sound into fragments. Echoes do not return reliably. Distance becomes impossible to judge. Ravines and valleys complicate matters further. Sound funnels unpredictably. A voice may seem close while originating far away. Searchers may move towards sound only to find nothing. Conversely, a missing person may hear activity and move toward it, increasing separation. This effect appears in multiple after-action reports. Teams note unconfirmed auditory contact. No visual confirmation follows. The sound does not repeat. Interpretation remains uncertain. Time passes. Silence also affects decision-making. When individuals call out and receive no response, they draw conclusions. They assume no one is nearby. They move again. This movement may carry them farther from search zones. Silence reinforces isolation, even when help is close. Wind alters sound behavior unevenly. Above the canopy, wind carries noise away. At ground level, still air traps it. A helicopter overhead may not be heard clearly below. Search aircraft often report difficulty confirming whether sound reached the ground. Night intensifies these effects. Temperature gradients change sound travel. Cool air settles. Noise bends upward. Calls become indistinct. Darkness removes visual confirmation. Silence feels absolute, even when activity continues nearby. Search protocols account for sound limits, but reliance persists. Calling remains a primary technique. Whistles are distributed, yet effectiveness varies widely. In some Northern California searches, individuals were later found within calling distance of teams who never heard them. Silence also affects signaling devices. Emergency beacons emit sound or signal intermittently. Dense canopy blocks transmission. Batteries fail. Signals reflect off terrain. Detection becomes inconsistent. Technology reduces risk but does not eliminate it. Forest silence is not constant. It fluctuates with weather. Fog dampens sound further. Snow absorbs vibration. Rain masks noise with uniform impact. During these conditions, auditory search becomes nearly ineffective. Animals contribute background noise that confuses detection. Bird calls mimic whistles. Branch movements suggest footsteps. Searchers must distinguish signal from environment. Fatigue reduces accuracy. False positives increase. Silence also affects morale. Prolonged lack of response wears on searchers. Effort feels unrewarded. Confidence declines. This influences coverage decisions. Teams may redeploy prematurely. Zones are deprioritized. For missing individuals, silence alters perception of time. Without auditory feedback, minutes feel longer. Movement feels slower. People may overestimate distance traveled. They may believe rescue is farther away than it is. Survivor accounts often mention disbelief at how close help had been. Some recall hearing faint sounds they dismissed as environmental. Others report shouting until hoarse without response. Silence shapes memory as much as action. Terrain amplifies silence selectively. Dense conifer stands absorb sound completely. Open granite areas reflect it oddly. Clearings transmit briefly, then cut off. Without understanding these patterns, movement decisions become guesswork. Search teams attempt to compensate by tightening spacing. This reduces area covered. Trade-offs emerge. Cover more ground with less certainty, or less ground with more certainty. Silence forces compromise. Communication between teams also suffers. Radios lose signal in valleys. Relays are required. Delays occur. Coordination slows. Silence spreads operationally as well as physically. In some Northern California cases, recovered remains were found within areas that had been called through repeatedly. No response was ever heard. The absence of sound was interpreted as absence of presence. This assumption proved incorrect. Silence also interacts with injury. An injured person may be unable to shout loudly. Breath control diminishes. Calls weaken. Even when attempts are made, they may not carry. Silence hides vulnerability. Psychologically, silence discourages persistence. After repeated unanswered calls, individuals conserve energy. They stop signaling. This is rational behavior under uncertainty. It also reduces detectability. Search documentation rarely emphasizes silence as a primary barrier. It is implicit rather than explicit. Reports note no response to verbal hailing. The implications are not explored. Northern California forests are structured to absorb sound. Layers of vegetation create acoustic insulation. This is beneficial ecologically. It is detrimental for rescue. Public education often underestimates this factor. People expect voices to travel. They expect noise to attract attention. In these forests, it often does not. Silence contributes to delayed discovery. Individuals may be close enough to be found, but remain undetected. Time passes, conditions change, distance increases, silence extends absence. Search strategies evolve slowly. Visual scanning and grid coverage gain emphasis, yet sound remains a tool because alternatives are limited. Silence continues to interfere. The forest does not amplify distress, it muffles it. It does not respond to calls. It does not reflect sound back clearly. This creates an environment where presence is easily missed. Silence is not passive. It actively removes feedback. It prevents correction. It discourages signaling. It limits coordination. It shapes outcome without visible force. Disappearance in Northern California forests is often quiet, not because nothing happened, but because sound could not carry it. Why some bodies are never found. In Northern California forests, disappearance does not always end in recovery. Many cases remain unresolved, not because searches never occurred, but because the environment prevents bodies from being located at all. This outcome is not rare. It is an expected result of how terrain, biology, and time interact. When a person dies in forested terrain, recovery depends on visibility, access, and preservation. Northern California limits all three. Dense vegetation conceals, remains quickly. Steep ground redirects movement. Seasonal cycles alter surfaces repeatedly. A body can vanish from practical detection within days. Decomposition begins immediately. In shaded forests, temperature slows the process unevenly. Soft tissue breaks down faster in warm months, slower in cold. Insects accelerate decay. In higher elevations, cold preserves longer, but also limits scent spread. By the time search teams arrive, biological indicators may already be altered. Scavenging is a major factor. Large animals such as bears and mountain lions move remains deliberately. Smaller scavengers disperse bones unpredictably. This process does not require predation. Animals investigate scent. Clothing and tissue are pulled apart. Bones are carried short distances and dropped. Over time, remains spread across terrain. This scattering complicates detection. Searchers expect bodies to occupy a single location. When remains disperse, each fragment becomes harder to recognize. Clothing fragments resemble discarded fabric. Without context, these items are overlooked. Terrain further hides evidence. Northern California forests contain ravines, talus slopes, dense brush, and volcanic features that swallow remains. A body can slide downhill silently. Leaves and needles accumulate rapidly. In some areas, ground cover renews annually. Evidence disappears beneath layers without disturbance. Water plays a significant role. Rivers, streams, and seasonal runoff move remains downstream. Transport may be brief or extensive. Water also damages evidence. Bones abrade, fabric tears, identification markers are lost. Once dispersed in water systems, recovery becomes unlikely. In many cases, death occurs away from trails. Even a short distance off path can place remains beyond routine human traffic. Most people do not look down slopes. They scan horizontally. A body below a trail may remain unseen indefinitely. Visibility decreases with time. Vegetation grows quickly in Northern California. Spring growth obscures winter exposure. Summer growth closes gaps. Autumn leaf fall conceals ground detail. Each season reduces detection probability. Search coverage is finite. Teams prioritize probability zones. Low probability areas may never be searched. If a body lies outside modeled zones, it may never be encountered. Models are necessary. They are not exhaustive. A thorough search does not mean complete coverage. It means systematic coverage of selected areas. Large sections remain untouched. This is not negligence. It is constraint. Fire alters outcomes unpredictably. In some cases, wildfires expose remains previously hidden. In others, fire destroys evidence entirely. High heat calcines bone. Identification becomes impossible. Ash redistributes fragments. Recovery may occur without resolution. Time erodes identification. Clothing degrades. Personal items rust or rot. Bones bleach and fragment. Without dental records or DNA, remains cannot be linked conclusively. Many recovered remains are classified as unknown. Search records reflect this reality. Cause of death is often listed as undetermined. Manner of death is not established. The forest does not preserve sequence. It preserves outcome incompletely. Some bodies are never found because they are never visible. They settle into depressions. They are covered by organic matter. They become part of the terrain. The forest absorbs them physically. Human perception contributes. Searchers scan for shapes that resemble human form. Once decomposition progresses, that form disappears. Remains no longer match expectation. Recognition fails. Animals accelerate this loss of form. Limbs separate. Orientation disappears. A body ceases to look like a body. It becomes scattered material. Distance compounds the problem. Even if remains are close to trails, vertical separation matters. A body 20 feet below a path may never be seen. Vegetation blocks downward sightlines. People look ahead, not down. Noise absence also matters. A deceased person cannot signal. Silence becomes permanent. Without movement or sound, detection relies entirely on chance intersection. In some cases, remains exist in terrain that is technically accessible but practically ignored. Steep slopes discourage travel. Dense brush deters entry. Searchers prioritize safer zones. Risk management limits exploration. Weather accelerates concealment. Snow buries. Rain redistributes. Wind covers. Each event reduces evidence further. Over time, the original location becomes unrecoverable. Northern California forests are biologically active. Nothing remains static. Organic material is recycled. Human remains are not exempt. The environment processes them without pause. Families often struggle with this reality. The absence of recovery feels unresolved. Yet absence is not anomaly, it is outcome. The system does not guarantee retrieval. Public narratives often assume that missing bodies imply unusual circumstances. In these forests, they do not. Non-recovery is consistent with environmental mechanics. Search and rescue professionals acknowledge this privately. Many state that recovery is sometimes a matter of chance rather than effort. No amount of planning overcomes certain terrain interactions. Technology improves detection but does not eliminate concealment. Drones miss under canopy. Thermal imaging fails after death. Dogs lose scent quickly. Tools reduce probability, not eliminate uncertainty. When bodies are not found, the case does not end. It remains open administratively or closes without resolution. Northern California forests do not erase people deliberately. They incorporate them. They redistribute material. They remove visibility. They do not preserve narrative. Some disappearances leave no recoverable trace because the environment functions as designed. Dense ecosystems recycle quickly. Rugged terrain hides effectively. Time compounds both. The absence of a body is not evidence of absence of cause. It is evidence of concealment by natural process. In these landscapes, disappearance does not require mystery. It requires conditions. Those conditions are present consistently. Bodies are never found, not because they were never there, but because the forest does not return what it absorbs. Patterns without conclusions. Across decades of disappearances in Northern California forests, certain features recur with enough regularity to be noted. They appear in reports written years apart by different agencies. They surface in terrain separated by hundreds of miles. Yet these repetitions do not assemble into a single explanation. They form patterns without resolution. The first pattern is proximity. Many disappearances begin near trails, roads, campsites, or familiar landmarks. These are not extreme environments. They are transitional spaces where human presence meets unmanaged land. The closeness creates confidence. The confidence delays response. Distance accumulates quietly. Another recurring feature is timing. Disappearances often occur during routine activity, short walks, day trips, brief separations. These moments are not framed as risk. As a result, absence is noticed late. When concern arises, the environment has already shifted. Objects appear repeatedly, but without narrative clarity. Backpacks are found zipped, shoes are discovered intact, clothing lies undamaged. These items confirm presence, but not sequence. They suggest calm behavior rather than struggle. They resist interpretation. Search operations follow protocol. Teams deploy according to probability. Terrain is analyzed. Resources are assigned. Effort is documented. Despite this, outcomes remain incomplete. Areas are searched. Evidence is logged. Resolution does not follow. Procedure does not fail visibly. It simply does not reach conclusion. Environmental factors recur without dominance. Weather alters orientation. Terrain redirects movement. Vegetation conceals evidence. Animals redistribute remains. Each factor explains part of the outcome. None explains all of it. Time behaves differently in these cases. Early hours matter most. After that, conditions reset. Snow erases tracks. Rain disperses scent. Growth conceals ground. Delayed discovery becomes common. Remains surface years later or not at all. Time closes windows rather than opening them. Human behavior shows consistency. Panic is rare early. Movement continues calmly. Familiarity replaces verification. Drift replaces error. Recognition arrives late. This behavior is ordinary. Its consequences are not. Experience does not protect reliably. Locals disappear. Seasoned outdoors people vanish. Knowledge of terrain does not translate to immunity. Familiarity narrows attention. Assumption replaces checking. Silence plays a persistent role. Voices do not carry. Signals fail. Search calls go unanswered. Individuals and teams operate without auditory feedback. Absence of sound is misread as absence of presence. Terrain memory guides movement without context. Old routes feel valid. Abandoned grades invite travel. Animal paths resemble trails. The land remembers pressure, not purpose. It offers guidance without guarantee. Recovery outcomes vary unevenly. Some individuals are found alive days later near trails. Others are never recovered despite extensive effort. Bodies may be discovered years later in areas already searched, or not discovered at all. These outcomes coexist without contradiction. Documentation reflects restraint. Reports avoid speculation. Language remains neutral. Observations are recorded without inference. This preserves accuracy. It also prevents synthesis. Patterns remain visible but unassembled. Public interpretation fills gaps. When explanation is absent, imagination enters. Stories form around mystery, yet the records themselves do not require extraordinary causes. They show interaction between ordinary behavior and complex environment. The forests themselves do not change in response to these events. Trails remain open. Visitors arrive unaware of prior cases. Disappearances are not marked on maps. The land does not acknowledge accumulation. This absence of acknowledgement affects perception. Each case appears isolated. Families experience loss individually, without centralized narrative. Repetition is noticed only by those who examine records collectively. Attempts to unify these cases under a single cause have failed. No consistent threat emerges. No single mechanism explains all outcomes. This does not mean the cases are unrelated. It means the relationship is structural rather than causal. Northern California, forests function as systems. They combine terrain, weather, biology, and human behavior into outcomes that resist linear explanation. Small variables interact. Feedback is delayed. Consequence emerges without warning. Patterns exist within this system. Familiar entry points, delayed response, calm movement, silent environments, concealed evidence. Each pattern recurs. Together, they describe a process rather than an event. The absence of conclusion does not imply absence of understanding. It implies limits. For investigators and searchers, this creates professional frustration. Effort is expended. Protocol is followed. Closure does not arrive. This is not failure. It is constraint. For families, the lack of resolution is more severe. Objects without answers. Searches without recovery. Time without explanation. Patterns offer no comfort when they do not resolve individual loss. The accumulation of cases suggests that disappearance in these forests is not anomaly. It is an outcome produced under specific conditions that recur regularly. Those conditions are present now, as they were decades ago. Northern California forests are not hostile. They are complex. They do not trap deliberately. They do not guide safely. They respond to movement, weather, and time without regard for human expectation. When people enter these environments, they bring assumptions shaped by routine and familiarity. The environment does not share those assumptions. The mismatch produces outcomes that feel disproportionate to cause. Patterns without conclusions are difficult to accept. Human reasoning seeks closure. These cases deny it. They remain open-ended, not because something is hidden deliberately, but because the system does not preserve narrative. The forest does not record intent. It records impact. It does not explain sequence. It alters ground. It absorbs sound. It redistributes material. What remains is incomplete. This incompleteness is consistent. It repeats across time and space. It is the defining feature of these disappearances. Understanding this does not resolve individual cases. It reframes them. It shifts focus from anomaly to process, from mystery to mechanism without single cause. Northern California forests continue to operate as they always have. People continue to enter them for ordinary reasons. Disappearances continue to occur under familiar conditions. The patterns persist. Conclusions do not. The record remains open. The disappearances linked to Northern California forests do not resolve neatly. They leave behind objects, reports, and patterns that resist a final explanation. What remains is not a single cause, but a recurring process shaped by environment and expectation. Familiar places, ordinary decisions, quiet outcomes. Understanding these cases does not mean assigning blame or searching for hidden forces. It means recognizing how easily normal behavior can fail inside complex landscapes, how confidence delays correction, how silence hides proximity, how time removes context faster than answers can form. If this documentary changed the way you think about familiar terrain, consider continuing the conversation. Share your thoughts below. Many of these patterns only become visible when examined together. If you value long-form, calm, documentary-style explorations like this, subscribe to the channel. New videos explore hidden patterns, overlooked systems, and histories that resist simple conclusions.